Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Mary Kay Rummel and Joanne Durham. Mary Kay will read first, and then Joanne. Mary Kay Rummel has been named a Poetry Hero of Ventura County, California, where she is a former poet laureate. Her 10th poetry collection, Little River of Amazements, New and Selected Poems, was recently published by Blue Light Press of San Francisco. She is a founding member of the nonprofit Ventura County Poetry Project, dedicated to connecting community through poetry. She is Professor Emerita from the University of Minnesota and taught at Cal State U, Channel Islands. Here's a superb poet, Mary Kay Rummel.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Harry. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm happy to read with Joanne, and it's great. I'm going to read mostly from my latest book, River of Amazements, which is a new and selected, published by Blue Light Press in San Francisco, with the editor, the great editor, Diane Frank. So because of that, a lot of the poems will be kind of a back and forth between past and present, and looking at the relationships. I want to start with a poem that kind of introduces me, for those of you that don't know me, and my background. And I was inspired by a poem written by Jackson Wheeler, my wonderful friend in Oxnard. And that's where I met Harry. And I read with Holly. It was fairly soon after I came to California. And I'll always remember that reading. It was just wonderful. So this poem is called Ars Poetica, and it won first prize in the Irish American Festival contest in San Francisco several years ago. Ars Poetica. Because my mother's mother carried her Irish language across a stormy Atlantic to St. Paul. Because my great-grandfather, who lived to be 100, sang in Irish as he bounced us on his bony leg. Because on the front porch of my grandmother's house, the cousins, all named Mary, learned 100 names for green from rebel songs. Because I lived 60 years before I learned my mother's father died under the hooves of a horse he was driving. Because my cousin, Sheriff O'Connor, who took bribes from Chicago gangsters, gave money to my widowed grandmother. Because when I read about him in St. Paul histories, I thought a saint, not a sinner. Because my father's tiny mother came from Galway with a family too full of priests and nuns. Because she loved to talk in the way of Irish women over tea and toast at small tables. Because I grew up in the quotidian music of women's murmuring, close to the ground where the world begins. Because men were either silent or overbearing, I lived my girl's life with Anne of Green Gables and Little Women. The bus plying the old fort road to school became my bridge at San Luis Rey. Because art and music were in the church, I thought beauty belonged to God. Because roots of my young astonishment cling to my inner life like the pine cone growing even after fire living scales. Because in the convent we were told to be silent, I picked up a pen. Because of my heart's homelessness. Because a poem waits for me to see it, the way Monet's last painting, his exact pink and red primroses, waited for his uncurtained vision. Because love will not let go. Because words unwrite as they are written and speak as they are spoken. Because my granddaughters listened to my tales of trolls and beanstalks, their eyes pools where words sink and grow, the way I once listened to the old ones. I do not want to die without writing my watery, unwritten universe. So I'm going to read a poem from from my first book, which came out in the 80s. And then I'll read one of much more recent, and they're both set in the same place. So I thought it'd be sort of interesting to see the connections. And the place is Chartres Cathedral in France. And the first poem is set on the outside. The second poem is set on the inside. And so this first poem is called Our Inheritance. Oh, and I saw it by looking up at the Last Judgment doors with the sculptures all across the top. And it's lust is hauling women off to damnations in those sculptures. And they're all nude, except there was one woman who wasn't and who was walking away. And I made up a story about her, Our Inheritance. All over Europe on Last Judgment portals of medieval cathedrals, lust with his grinning belly and ass head carries women to damnation. Nude women slung over his shoulder, their hair hanging long. And on the left side of the main portal of Chartres Cathedral, place of the lost, the damned, one woman walks, is not carried, not nude, a nun, all but her face veiled. And she smiles as she walks, a message to generations of neck-sore women, as if she is saying it was worth it, like nothing that ever happened before. I love to look at you, he said, to talk while I'm loving you. I closed my body for a long, cold season. In one brief transit, I opened it for him. You smell so good to me, he said. I love to taste you. He loved my body. With him, my body was my soul. I love to listen to your small sounds. I wanted to swallow him. In me, one heliacal rising. On my knees in cold mornings, I tried to exercise him. In the night when I beat my flesh, his face grew on my thighs. In this city of God built by men, who can I ask for forgiveness? Why would I, who have broken out of this book of glass written by men, come back to the same death? These circles that open into God close down on a woman who knows that body and soul are one. So that was a long time ago. And this poem is from my last, not my new one, from the book I did just before the pandemic. It's called Son et Lumière Chartres. Walking the medieval city, buildings crumbling in black, rows of blousy yellow roses, I feel cracked old walls absorbing heat. Outside the great cathedral, I lean back far enough to glimpse workers scraping scaly soot from stained glass. Inside, I study pantheons of light and blue illusion, where the Madonna seems to look on me in kindness. In her window, she floats in lapis lazuli of a southern sky, while sunlight falls, burning like this moment from inside out. When my mother at 80 was dying, she asked me to be sure my father didn't marry that woman from church who wanted the money she'd let him save instead of giving her the new kitchen she longed for. I'm sorry now that I laughed, knowing it would never happen. My mother fought against the hardest thing, letting go, as the seas rose in her lungs. Now I hold mother, father together in my body, in my mind, a talisman. Here, across a rising sea from home, I feel closer to them. and to her. Beside these walls, I feel like a child holding shards of history, blessed by the sacred haloing of light as it falls through the Madonna, through her C's 12th century cobalt. Tonight's offering, light and music, near the great Last Judgment doors. Angel acrobats will fly across stone faces of the saved and lost. I'll wake in the morning, cold, neck sore, stiff-boned. These things tell me the world is here, saying goodbye. I'm going to go to a more recent poem. I have a lot of blue in my poems, like that one, which really I was amazed. They had just cleaned all the windows at Chartres Cathedral from the 12th century, and it's called Chartres Blue, and they've never been able to make it any other place. It's incredibly beautiful. But this poem is called Becoming Blue. Watching a surfer disappear with a stroke and slide of board into a mist cloud of aquamarine, I think, this is how it will be. Just swim or float into blue that goes on and on. Will my soul be a hawk slicing lapis or ultramarine? A pelican threading cerulean? A heron connecting earth and sky? Blue has no root nor core, but something inside hears me. Blue laps about my toes, the same woad blue brushed by Celts and Picts over their skin. My skin, like theirs, is glowing cobalt with a wild smell, pregnant azure of the sea waiting for sundown. My whole body leans into the future blue, Olo, the newest, unearthly teal discovered in a lab. Love is leaping blue. I know it afterward by the traces left behind in this air garden, in this dust where we dance like the blue dancers, Matisse cut from paper. Once blue hailed me. Now it's always quietly calling. Every hue and brilliance blending into pigments and arching back again. So I'm in Minnesota right now, and I'm going to read some poems that are set in Minnesota. One, again, take us back to another time, like now, a very iconoclastic time, 1969. It's called The Songs, and it's for the poet John Biederman. We passed one day on the steps of Lind Hall, you late for class, wild hair, glasses askew. I was just out of the convent, new in graduate school, books bouncing on my back as I ran down Church Street to join the marchers. 5,000 strong on Washington Avenue, they sang, "We shall overcome," and then began the chant that frightened me. Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh is going to win. I couldn't sing because those jungles hid my youngest brother. At home, I opened your dream songs, blown away by your impertinent piety. Iambic, the only verse I knew until you brought me ear to ear with a new scripture. You wrote, "A Buddhist doused in the street serenely burned. The Secretary of State for War, winking it over, screwed a redhead whore. Monsignor Capovilla mourned, what a week. You wheedled me, not with beauty, but scarifying singe, created in all-night drunks, bruised, raging blues, your book of revelations. I wanted some of that wildness in me as your songs freed my lines, my fears. Your music moved in me. How could I resist? I was learning poetry and sex. 3 years later, your body hit the rocks below the river bridge I walked across. My brother in the hospital. My country was still bombing. Vietnam to kingdom come. Now, this next poem is also set in Minnesota, up north, near the Canadian border, near Lake Superior. And it's called How to Do the Ropes course, and it's based on an experience I had. I was at a camp up there, and they made me do the ropes course. 1. How to do the ropes course. 1. Look up. From here on the North Shore, everything flows downward as wild rivers tumble and crash their path to Lake Superior. You and I are changing, one downward step, then another, until we stand in a new landscape with the ice going out, booming, and we, disoriented, bemused, all senses open to the roaring of it. First, we climb and balance, then we fall. The body starts to dry. The moment of greatest pleasure becomes movement without sound, like watching dancers from a distance. Put on the harness. 2, you are gone. Like a word I know I have but can't find. Drifting note, smear of apple skin, empty chair. Later, as I walk into the room looking for something else I lost, the gladiola waves like a magenta flag. And you are waiting. Old friend, you say. Why did you worry? 3, put one foot in front of the other on the balance beam in the trees. It's like the time we lay in the grass below stars, listening. The adagietto was a wall or a blue doorway in the wall. The long road into north, fire road that climbs between pines, then drops into silence behind silence. The shadows behind trees becoming your hands. I remember stars spinning and your hands behind them. 4, jump far from what we are losing. Most people stand on the platform and leap. I sit on the edge and squirm off, feeling the wood grind beneath me. Something in you wants to know the truth about the world. When we walked along the sand, your body had the feel of a running horse. Now you leave like water leaves, memories in debris on the shore. Check harness, close eyes, push. Between us the air, jagged. And this poem is also set up there on the Canadian border and the boundary waters. It's based on an experience I had canoeing. The gift. In golden midsummer cotton grass, I hunched behind a wind dwarf pine to watch a female moose and her calf high step from forest to shore. She lifts her head and long ears twitch as she inhales inhabitant of a wind that blows my way, so I stay hidden in my human smell. Mother and calf bend to drink. The water, rusty with iron, lies still between clumps of reeds. Liquid rainbows yield to lapping tongues, flow under velvet to become marshlight in the eye of the moose. I see the cotton grass let go, gathering, rising. The spirit of each water hole deserts its body to ghost over the marsh, like Christ on a church wall ascending. I know salvation is not the blood of the Lamb, but in the blood of a woman when her rivers flow. In a room golden with morning and moose light, my children emerged from my dark waters. I gave them the river wide after thawing. And I'm going to end with a short poem. It's from this book, which I want to show you. It's, in case you haven't seen it, it's called Women in a Golden State. And it's an anthology of poems from California women. I think the cutoff age was 60. I'm not sure, but it's definitely Women in a Golden State. And it's a really wonderful anthology. I've been reading it all summer. So this is the poem, my poem that's in it. The song you hear at night is the Pacific. It's the first thing you see in the morning. No longer frightened by an unexplainable grief. What passes for a voice in the magnified moment is the song of a cricket. The lyrics you carved in the sycamore have already been told, your late arrival expected by hooting owls. The song of sleep, is it singing you? What have you kept? What will you keep? How have you lived? How are you living? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Your poetry is radiant. You know, the title of your new and selected Little River of Amazement. You have read Amazement. You're just astounding. It's so full of humanity and love and clarity and narrative strength and your ancestry and your love of women. You lift women up as well as you lift us all up. And so such a beautiful reading. You really sing in your poetry. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry.
Yeah, you just have such a great range, and you're such a caring poet. We have a few minutes left. I have a couple of questions for you. Mm-hmm. When did you write your first poem?
When did I write it?
Yes.
Well, in high school. I read it in high school. Actually, that's when I started writing. When I went to this Catholic girls' school, and this nun in English, when I was a junior, played a tape, or not a tape, a record of Murder in the Cathedral, by Will Elliot. And it was a BBC program, and it just blew me away. And it was because I just didn't know poetry could be that way. And it was the sound of it that did it. And I've always, sound is really, that's what poetry is to me, is music. And that's where it started. And I remember very consciously behind my other books, like in higher algebra, trying to write poems instead, because I was with that, not the higher algebra, sad to say. I got caught too. I remember.
Well, your poetry is musical. And, you mentioned Eliot and you mentioned Biederman. I love both of them. Who are some of the people poets who influenced you before you started writing regularly in a serious way?
I think I got really serious after I got to work with Linda Gregg at the Loft in Minneapolis. And they brought her in to work with it. They had a mentor award. I was a mentee. And that sort of changed my life as a poet. And I learned so much from her. She was wonderful. And I love her poetry, still do.
Well, when I also think of Minneapolis, I think of Thomas McGrath and Jim Moore. And
right. And Jim Moore, I've known forever.
Yeah,
right.
I forget his first wife, but thank you for such a beautiful reading. It just really touched my soul deeply, and all of us. You're just, as I said, radiant. So
Thank you. And thank you. And I was so happy to see you again after meeting you at Jackson's reading. It just kind of brought it all back.
I remember that very well. And I also want to thank David Oliveira for recommending you. Thank you, David. And thank you, David. Mary Kate Rummel. Our next poet is Joanne Durham. Joanne Durham is the author of To Drink from a Wider Bowl, winner of the Sinclair Poetry Prize, Evening Street Press 2022, and the chapbook on Shifting Shoals, Kelsey Books 2021. Her poetry appears in numerous journals and anthologies, including Poetry South, Vox Populi, North Carolina Literary Review, Sky Island Journal, and the upcoming Paloma Press anthology, The Nature of Our Times. Her most recent awards are the 2025 Miriam Chaikin Poetry Prize and Lascaux Poetry Prize finalist. She teaches poetry workshops online and through the Osher Lifelong Learning Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. She lives on the North Carolina coast with the ocean as her backyard, muse, and source of sustenance in difficult times. Here's a splendid poet, Joanne Durham.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you for inviting me. And Mary Kay, it was just delightful hearing your work. I'm going to start with a couple of poems from my poetry book, To Drink from a Wider Bowl. I'll read the first poem. This book is kind of an homage to being an older woman and kind of traces the journey that's brought me here. It's called Old Folks. Old folks weather things. We hold our tongues when young women bemoan their first gray hairs. We doze off to dream mid-afternoons on worn cushioned couches, then lie with unclosed eyes through the deep holes of night. There's a haze that hovers above dates, spaces, places. When was the summer of the beach house in Ocracoke? Which snow rose over the sills? Memory no longer churs like an eager bird easing into morning wings, sipping on rain that drips from every rafter. Time stretches like an accordion, stores lullabies, love songs, and funeral chords between its folds. We are thirsty still, but drink from a wider bowl. My mother's kitchen. Of course, I thought my mathematician dad was the source of my school smarts, those A's first grade through grad school. Yet here, in my uncle's memoirs, Lillian, the funny sister, and Clara, the smart one. Clara, my mother, who smoothed hurt feelings like she ironed wrinkles from my father's shirts, but never went to college, started work in the bargain basement at 15, pretending she was 20, married and escaped into homemaking, led Girl Scout camping trips and baked chocolate chip cookies. I mocked her in my teenage years for how ardently she redid the kitchen in a palette of mauve and faux fern. The smart one. All that time I was satisfied with a simple language, and now I know I needed one with 20 words for snow, or one that spells mother 6 different ways. And I'm sitting again at her kitchen table, the morning she mused about the gifted class she loved in 2nd grade. But they moved for the 3rd time, and anyway, she was just a little girl. Then she folds her yellow flowered apron and steps aside, as she always did, to let everyone else's life parade across the crowded pavement while she smiled and waved and cheered us on. This next poem in the book was written after a photograph in the New York Times that came out probably 7 or 8 years ago. Unfortunately, it's quite as relevant, more relevant probably today than it was then. It's called Superpowers. Formed from a torn tablecloth, his checkered cape floats free behind him, arms spread, one foot suspended in air, ready to leap from the kitchen shelf into his father's arms. He has his balance, a 5-year-old boy with superpowers, a boy ready for flight. The boy will take flight soon with his father. They will not fly. They will walk, perhaps more than 100 shadeless days. They will leave behind the tablecloth, the kitchen, the brilliant hues of the quetzal bird flying across a woven blanket. The father has surveyed his coffee fields, once fertile, leaves now consumed in brown fungus, no sooner rotting than passing their poison to the next plant, leaving the belly of the boy almost as empty as the belly of the father. I wish him superpowers, to fly safely across borders he knows they are not welcome to cross, spurned by a power as unyielding as his land. And this is the last poem in this book. It's called Sunrise Sonnet for My Son. My son unloads the dishwasher first thing each morning. I think of him 400 miles away as I stand on tiptoe to shelve last night's wine glasses, stack my mother's dessert plates, open the drawer between the oven just deep enough for all the pots and pans. He says for him, too, it's a kind of meditation. This routine he and his wife have shaped into the contours of a shared life, fluted and spacious as the overflowing fruit bowl. This is what he possesses, not Lenox or Waterford, which neither of us owns. This man I raised, who hums as he sorts the silverware, noticing how each spoon shines. As Harry said, for the past decade, I've lived on the North Carolina coast. And so my chapbook on Shifting Shoals is all about what it's like to be a sort of northern transplant in a small North Carolina beach town. This first poem is called Rite of Passage. And all the names of groups that you'll hear in the poem are actually some of the names of the groups of different animals. Rite of Passage. A handful of boys to men, a herd, a flock, a quiver, a swarm. Red danger flag today, hurricane beyond the horizon, foam chops, riptide slash. They stand unsteadily, waist deep in waves, no surfers or beach dwellers these. They punch, wrestle, jab each other, headlocks and twists, unabashed animal play. A band, a knot, an army, a pod. The youngest encased in life jackets stands slightly apart, tests the waters alone. The rest, a pride, a bevy, a gaggle, a shiver, grab legs, torsos, root and hoop as they drag each other down, a rite of common contortions. Muscles gleam against the sun, slender or stocky. They tease and throw their willful weight around, uneven-footed. None nods to the ocean's power. I can't stop watching them, tiny specks in tumultuous sea. I can't stop thinking about the men I love, the strength it takes to swim out of the school, the yoke, the troop, the pack, to fight the relentless pull. I wrote a short poem about the sea, and I mentioned the Red Sea in it, and someone in a group told me, well, you can't put the Red Sea in a poem. A famous poet had told them that you just can't do that. So, of course, immediately I wanted to put the Red Sea in a poem. So this is called You Can't Put the Red Sea in a Poem. You can't put the Red Sea in a poem, a famous poet warned. If you let it in, your poem is crammed with 2 million Israelites clutching babies in arms, with satchels of clothes and unleavened bread. And you've invited in the enormous weight of a God who punishes evil by slaying slave owners' children. So here come the Egyptians as God splits open that unmentionable sea, just in time for the migrants to cross, and closes it right up on the pursuers. And your poem is choking on all those drowning men, flailing horses, and wrecked chariots. And next thing you know, you have races and nations and power and poverty, all spilled in the red ink of misery, and your poem is overwhelmed. It's baffled that he, since it's always he, never sat them all down and explained this wasn't what he had in mind. Those intense 7 days, he created a world so magnificent, poets can't stop trying to describe it. Which is what happened to me when it snowed at the beach at high tide. Not just a dusting, but a full-on onslaught of snow we haven't seen in these parts in years, downing telephone wires and snapping tree branches and power out. When the snow finally stopped and the tide receded, it left a wide strip of sand along the shore, snow mounds piled like crystal dunes on one side, and the ocean's perpetual roar on the other, and in between, a tiny miracle of a parting I passed through, kicking scattered seashells, like nothing strange and beautiful had happened. Nothing that needs to mention the Red Sea. This poem is called Equanimity. There are slow hinges on the kitchen cabinets, so the doors never slam. But I slam many doors when my worries become unhinged. Then I slide open the screen door and walk out to the ocean. It urges me to listen between roar and purr, abandon my frantic grip, trying to steer the tide. I scroll my fingers over the smooth shell that rests in my pocket, savor the slippery sea inside my palm. Lately, in the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to be in a group where we write acrostic poetry together, a poetry that's inspired by art. And so I'd like to read you a couple of those poems, and I'm going to try to share my screen so that you can see the the painting here that this poem was inspired by. This is a painting called The Foolish Versions by Marianne von Werfken. And it depicts the parable of the 10 virgins from the book of Matthew in the New Testament, where some women were allowed into the kingdom of heaven and some were not. So my poem is called Parable of the Foolish Virgins Revised. 10 old women steered their wooden boat out to meet the sunset. There were those among them whose bodies knew ecstasy, those who knew violation, those who felt the fine thread of love stitching together their cells. Women who had lived on the few slips of earth where they were allowed to read had taken vast journeys of the mind. Others learned from stones and rivers and the deep pain of hunger and their children's hunger. And some learned from both. They were, then, neither ignorant nor innocent. All of them sometimes felt wisdom stir in their bones. But since none had found the path to ending cruelty in the world, none claimed to be wise. They were wise enough, though, to take turns at the helm. They had seen such transformations many times, but still they marveled at how the sun nudged the mountains into fire, painted the river tones as varied as their own skins. Some had brought provisions, bread, oranges, lanterns, sweaters stretched for wear. Others had departed hastily, had nothing left to bring. When they reached the portal to their destination, they breathed relief that no one commanded them. Only you can enter, you cannot. You must bring this or that. Those with knowledge from books had prepared them for such orders, and the ones who studied patterns of roots of trees and the touch of sun on every leaf were confident no such command would come. They were ready, though, and agreed they would entwine their fingers to basket themselves, shelter one another in their arms, enter by the strength of their dimming light. And this is another ekphrastic poem inspired by Faith Ringgold's Hide Little Children. It's called What Am I? And it was published in the Inflectionist Review. The last poem, I'm sorry I didn't mention, was a prose poem that was in Litmosphere. What am I? My 4-year-old grandson asks, meaning color, race, meaning he overheard adults talking, meaning as he plays hide and seek on the preschool playground with Yesenia, Nazarene, Daquan. So far, their differences have all sorted in the same folds of his brain, with tall and short, skinny and plump, fast runner and slow, meaning he doesn't know with his white face, peering from bushes where they all hide, that his world looks different from how it looks to Nazarene, Yesenia, Daquan, or how the white world fixes them in their places, meaning he will soon shed his innocence, like the cicadas molt their nymph skins, exposed as their bodies harden, meaning we'll do our best to teach him the meaning of the long shadow white casts, without casting him into its mold. I've also been writing a lot of eco-poetry, and so I'd like to end by sharing some of those poems. This one's called Vision, and it was first published in Cider Press Review. Vision. I need sight like a mantis shrimp, each eye sweeping its own span of ocean. Or eagles who quickly shift their focus, see 8 times farther than humans. To scan the street through the eyes of the man I passed this morning curled on the sidewalk grate, seeing us from our ankles up as we sidestep litter, kick coffee cups into the gutter. To view the past, too, with multi-coned eyes, all its scorched and silken colors. To stare ahead at century's end, half the world's glaciers melted, with sight like owls, whose eyes let light in again after it's passed through, a second chance to navigate darkness. To trace the path dawn didn't take this morning, muzzled by rain, how sun sneaks between a different set of clouds. This poem was first published in Cackalack. What I learned about bladderworts at Carolina Beach State Park. I couldn't wait to share their name with my grandson, who rolled the sounds around his tongue and giggled, jumped up from his jigsaw puzzle, suddenly needing to pee, yelling, "Bladderwort, bladderwort." They're seldom noticed in our state park, unlike their rare and heavenly cousin, Venus flytrap, queen of the carnivorous plants, whose dainty pink vulnerability headlines all the brochures, nectar oozing from her leaves, irresistible to flies, ants, beetles. Common bladderworts took a different route. Not willing to shrivel in the coast's parched soil, they learned eons ago to slip below boggy lakes and ponds, open their sacs and snap shut on aquatic worms and water fleas. Nourished, their orchid-like blooms rise as though floating above the swamp. When should I tell my grandson how long it took bladderworts to evolve their plan? How little time we have left for ours. He's back to his puzzle, nudges the last crest of blue ocean beside the curve of California, then gives me a high five and cries, "No missing pieces." And I'll end with this poem that was in Pine Song, which is the awards issue of the North Carolina Poetry Society. Praying Mantis inches forward on spikes as thin as spider silk, barely whispers her presence, tiptoes over umber leaves, crouches so close she hears the rush of water through their veins. Deadheading daisies in my garden, I almost crush her sleek body, blended to blades of grass as she slips beneath the leaf that dwarfs her shadow. Journeys through sticks of twisted bark, seek sustenance in a temporary temple. I want to tread gingerly through everything that falls, rots, weeps on this earth. She knows the way better, disturbs little, carries 100 million years of ancestral knowledge inside her wisp of prayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Your poetry is just beautiful. You take the art and you transform it into poetry in such a beautiful and poignant way. And also your poems about ancestry and family, and there's a stillness and a repose, and also a sensuous music in your poetry, and it is transcendent, and it is joyful, and it is loving. So thank you. You just inside and outside, you show so much, and you give so much to us. So thank you for such a wonderful reading. I have a couple questions to ask to you. When did you write your first poem?
My first poem was when I was about 6 or 7 years old. It was called Me and My Mommy. And I honestly don't know. There was nothing really in my family that was terribly literary. But my dad, I wrote a poem in To Drink from a Wider Bowl about him. He was an electronics engineer, but he loved to play with words. And, he had a good sense of humor, and he was always making up like funny sounds and things like that. I think maybe that propelled me. But then I didn't really, I continued to write and keep journals and stuff. And I was a teacher, and I shared poetry with my kids all the time. And I taught teachers in Writers' Workshop, but I didn't really come to focusing on my own poetry until about the last 8 or 9 years. And then once I got into it, I'm in.
You excel. And your poetry is refreshing too. Who are some of the poets who influenced you before you started writing in a regular, serious way?
I think the first was Walt Whitman. My father had the modern library edition of Leaves of Grass that among the books I guess he'd had from college, and I just read that book all the way through, and it really moved me. It just did something. I think I was in high school then, and then in college, I was an English literature major. We mostly read the dead white men, but we did have a modern American poetry class where I read Denise Levertov, and she had a big impact on me. The sense of a woman relating a woman's life, and also her connection to her times and to the world around her. All of that meant a lot to me. And then as a teacher, I taught little kids, so I learned all the I read poetry of a lot of poets who also write for adults, like Naomi Shihab Nye. I first saw through her poetry for children, and then I discovered all her wonderful poetry for adults. Same thing with Lucille Clifton and Nikki Giovanni, poets like that have just really enriched everything I feel about poetry.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
I keep a little saying on my bulletin board from the poet Eric Campbell. He wrote, and I'll probably, misquote this, but he wrote, I read and write poetry because I have a soul that needs a periodic tune-up. And I think that's why poetry appeals so much to me, that it lets you go deep into things. It lets you to explore, what's under the surface that often is not, what we talk about in just our kind of daily lives. And I think everybody needs some kind of form of art to hold on to. And poetry's just always been mine.
I agree. We have a few minutes left, so why don't each one of you say something about the other's poetry or reading, and start with Joanne, since she just finished. You say a little bit about Mary Kay's poetry, and then vice versa.
Well, I so enjoyed your reading, Mary Kay. I think the whole sense of women's reality in so many different facets, humor, determination, strength, dealing with the world around us. I felt it was so, and of course, beautifully done. I mean, some of your images, the humor also that would creep in here and there, that I felt is important in like when you said something about, there was one poem you wrote, because you had to be silent with the nuns, you took up your pen. I thought that was a wonderful line. And just that humanity, I think, that and the sense of the journey that so many of us take in different ways, but our journeys can be very different, but you reach down into something that is universal for all of us.
Mary Kay?
Yeah, I think we probably have a lot in common if we sat down and, at that. But I have to tell you, the poem about the Red Sea just totally blew me away. I kept thinking about, it's just like a huge poem, about that, taking something geographic, something in history, and then thinking about all the weight it carries. And I started thinking, gosh, you could come up with a list of like that, of places, geographic places on Earth that have seen so much pain and suffering and victory too. It was just, I just thought it was a wonderful poem. Really wonderful.
I agree. It was also very refreshing too. And, you two are both such great poets. It's such an exalting reading. Joanne, you live on the coast there. North Carolina is such a beautiful state. My brothers live back there. My sister-in-laws, obviously, and their children. And I've been there, and there's so much greenery. And Cape Hatteras, right? That's near there too, in there. What would you like to say about what you think is important today in poetry? There's so much going on in the external world. What do you think a poet should, not that he or she should, but what is important to you to focus on in this time?
Well, I think it's about the balance between maintaining one's inner integrity and humanity, and noticing and feeling the precious things in our lives, and at the same time relating to everything that's going on in the outer world, and standing up and having the strength to move forward in the ways that we want our world to move forward. I find that my own writing right now weaves between those two things, between needing to express how I feel about what's going on, and at the same time needing to maintain my balance and my humanity.
What would you say, Mary Kay, about that?
Well, I just think it's so many people need art in their life right now, and need poetry or music, or it's sort of what's going to get us through. It keeps us sane, and as I said, I think you can build community around that, and it's the community that helps bring people together. And I've noticed that at some of our poetry gatherings, that there's just this hunger for this is, and it's just a way of facing the world, I think, and a way to keep beauty in the world. So it's really important right now. I think more important than it's been, for a long time. I mean, culturally.
It's also good to keep getting that individual voice out in the face of a mass culture.
Yeah.
When they keep giving us so much repetition, and fear and consumption is given to us all the time. But I always love the human voice, the human being in a particular landscape, in a particular time, and obviously getting larger too. So you two are both very sagacious, and you've really lifted up my day, as well as I know the listeners and watchers. So Jennifer Clymer, would you like to bring us home or say anything before we go? But before
go ahead.
Well, just before, let me just talk about one quick thing. Next Tuesday, we're reading from Jane Kenyon, complete poems with the wonderful readers and actor poets Corinne Conley, Phoebe McAdams, and Amelie Frank. Here's Jen.
I need to ask a very important question. What does sagacious mean?
Wise, wisdom, sagaciousness, wisdom, wise, sagacious.
Being a sage.
Being a sage. Okay, I love that. That is the thing I learned today. Thank you, Harry. And thank you both, Joanne and Mary Kay. That was wonderful. I so appreciate your time and your creativity and your talent. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.